Well, good day. This is Dr. Michael Fisher, FearTalk 28. Very interesting guest today. More than interesting, actually a very creative and very innovative person that I've just recently met. And so we'll get into that. I will have her pronounce her own name because I know I will mess it up. I pronounce it in a very particular way, and I want to hear the way she pronounces it, and that's important as well to respect her language and her tradition. So, Fair Talk, I usually do quite a little spiel at the beginning of each one, and I will not do that today. Usually I say, well, this is what dialogue is, what it means to me. It's not about arguments. It's not necessarily about this and conflict and all these things could be there. But I always use the idea of dialogue, as if it's a very nice term that, oh, that sounds so harmonious. And I said today, no, don't set that up. With my guest today, and we'll enter why it's so unique for me to be speaking with her in her particular locations of many kinds. It's unique and critical that I am not just imposing what I think a dialogue ought to be. And I want it to be really co-emergent, and particularly from the differences that we will elaborate in the beginning. And then we'll get into fear and fearlessness talks. We'll get into the dissertation work of our guest today and a lot of interesting things on, you'll hear, generational trauma and epigenetics. And who knows what else we'll get into, but I'll turn it over to my guests to introduce themselves and their location of how they would like to enter this conversation of differences and sameness.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I am Mmabatho Montse, currently in Tshwane, the capital of South Africa. I am a dynamic person and I have many experiences, and I think the more I grow into who I am, the more I feel like I do not want to necessarily categorize myself according to titles. I am having a very unique life experience, very dynamic. I find myself in the academic space, which is where I met Michael. I think it's not only academic, but it is also a personal development space where we met. We will dance with mountains, curated by Bayo Akomolafe. One of the reasons I signed up for the course is because I felt that I needed to find my voice. And so this voice that I've needed to find is one of the very particular experiences that I'm currently, I don't know, it's a process. I'm currently on a journey of finding my voice across the different areas of life that interest me. So that is my spirituality with the history that I come from, born in the 80s to a migrant woman from Lesotho living in South Africa with very little education, what her experiences were, with the unfortunate having to deal with the unfortunate fact that my mother died when I was 17. And so I don't have that benefit of hearing her story from her. And she was like an odd one out. So there's also those kind of things that I'm dealing with. I am the odd one out.
No, are you really?
So
Are you really?
yes. I think I've never fit in, and I think I'm learning to appreciate that I will not ever fit in, and I actually like that. Yeah, so different experiences informed by my spirituality trying to understand who I am at the core. And everything else are things that I love doing. I love entrepreneurship. I've been an entrepreneur since in my early 20s. Retail, I love beautiful spaces. And so I had an interior decor store as well. I love helping people develop themselves. So helping people to see the signposts that life often gives us that we might not see because we tend to, just focus on the immediate things. And I think that that is connected to the fear talk we're about to have, how we view our lives and the opportunities that we can either take up or the limitations that particular view then present in our lives. So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll be talking about fears, of course, but mostly I think both of you and I are also very interested in the lens of fear. And it becomes an actual lens of perception, not just a feeling or an emotion easily identified with an object, right? And this also then leads to the idea of a fearlessness idea or a paradigm or philosophy or a movement, many of the things I've talked about and you've been curious about as we've met over this last year, questioning various things. So we can get into whatever all that is. Thanks for that intro. I'm going to now problematize our relationship a little bit more without, I'm going to fall into all the traps of categories. So this is going to be exactly some part of what you can resist and you want to resist. And I can understand somewhat why you, because I resist categories too, because I also don't fit in. So you can hear if one doesn't feel they fit in any category, it's almost already under surveillance by us, I think, with a certain vigilance. Oh, well, where are you trying to fit me? Like, why? And this starts when we're little children. This starts very immediately. Obviously, when you have certain physical qualities, etc., you're already categorized as this or that or this. But on the
And
point of, yeah, go ahead.
for me, it's also about whether I'm living into that particular category. So, for instance, you know that I'm pursuing this PhD, and it means trying to understand, for me at least, the experiences of my ancestors, being a Black woman born in apartheid, how that has influenced me, having answered my calling to become a sangoma ngaka, trying to understand the fundamental differences between that, because I've got at least, within the past 200 years, in terms of my immediate lineage, 4 different tribes to deal with. So trying to understand what that means for them, and how that has influenced who I am. When I say I'm a matriarchal leader, what does that mean for me? Understanding Ubuntu, which is what I'm trying to understand. What was the religious practice of African people? Because I find many sort of like spiritual practices are based on the culture of the land, right? I found that particularly within the indigenous worldview, they're all saying the same thing. The only difference is the culture of that particular land and the context, for a particular practice. And so trying to understand the truth in all of that, and how each lineage practiced that, what it signified for them.
Yeah.
So some of these things are not things I take very lightly, because I find that there are a lot of words, especially in English. There are a lot of words, but what do they mean? Like, what do they mean when we say I'm a leader? What does it mean? For me, understanding what has happened to my people as a businesswoman, who is grounded in spirituality, a deep, deep reverence for God, and having that kind of a very deep relationship. How do I handle theft in my business, for example? Understanding the background of my people, understanding what I'm recovering from. So how do I deal with those things? And so I think for me, the categories and me trying to a little bit is because I find that many people use a lot of words, but they often do not translate into being lived up to.
Okay, cautionary advised. Mmabatho, thank you. Let me try and dive into what I would call a critical pedagogical approach. So I am a critical pedagogue theorist. I see you as someone interested in the decolonizing project. And that has a critical theory behind it in some ways. It has a critical pedagogy in some ways, referring to how we socialize and educate ourselves and how we move out into the world as educators. So first category I'm going to give you is I'm calling you a decolonial educator, activist, and leader. Let's leave that. We can come back to that category. And so from my point of view of understanding a bit of your work, and I've read some, and so we've had several discussions, here are some of the differences that I think are really important for me as a white male situated in the north of America, to be able to have a conversation that feels like you and I can begin to create an ethical space. So there's a term I'm throwing out, an ethical space of discourse, of dialogue, what you call in your podcast, perhaps conscious conversations. So yeah, you have a program. I've been on that program. I've invited you now to a FearTalk, and I realize we're both after a critical conversation, but that is conscious of and not interested in just getting caught up in categories and all the problems. Yet I don't want to ignore, so this is my position as an educator, I don't want to ignore that the categories are operating, even if you and I do not feel that we live in them. But I'm going to suggest we still have to negotiate and transverse them. So here, let's see if see how much I can nail down here. You can challenge or disturb or whatever. So this is how I think you and I are so different. It should be impossible for us to have a really good conscious conversation without getting mad at each other or dissing, deleting, whatever we do to each other. So I don't know how we're doing this. I think it's a practice of fearlessness to be able to at least enter this discourse of differences. I'm interested in bridging instead of breaking. So that's one thing I'm interested in. I think you'll have a very similar yes on that, more or less. But after that, it gets really complicated. So here's some of the differences I listed this morning. We are working in a territory together, abutting territories, if you will, or spaces, histories, lands that are so far away, you in Africa, me in Canada, yet coming up and bridging through the ability of us both to use English language. That's essential, that we can have a complicated conversation, interested in the emancipatory, the liberational, the decolonizing. Yes, so again, similarities. And then we drop into difference again, racialized conversation that we're going to have to be always aware of, sexualized conversation, capitalized conversation, north, south. You're the first person I've done in all my podcasts who I would say lives actually in the global south. And what does that mean? Why did that come up? I thought of it this morning. I have never had one. I have never had a Black woman that I could talk to. And then when you say you're a Black womanist, I'm a spiritual Black womanist. I live on these lands. I am connected to these ancestors. I am of the shamanic tradition of Sangoma, etc. And then we have an East-West Orientalism, which has been called basically in Europe, in the Western European Anglo-Saxon world, we tend to exoticize the Orient, and Africa becomes part of that other. And so that creates all kinds of weird and fantastical ideas and imaginaries of who you are over there. where the real civilized people are, where the not so civilized. See, these are all ways of coming to other ways that we have differences. And that's class involved in that. There's ideas of civilization and there's ideas of advancement. And then that leads to ideas of evolution and developmentalism. Who developed first? Who's the most advanced? And evolution gets into that. So we have all those categories. I have to transverse those because I'm interested in development. I'm interested in evolution. I'm interested in consciousness. And then we get differences in spaces between, I just list a few more, is, yeah, what is progressivism? What's progressive education? That means a lot in the Western world. I don't know how much it means to you folks over there in the other part of that world. But in the West, our progressive notion of education, that is like the liberal, right? It's like the left, the progressive, the with it, the cool people, the advanced people, the emancipatory people. But progressivism is loaded with all kinds of ideas of what does that mean to progress and who's progressed the most to claim progressivism. I mean, that is such a dangerous territory for me. And I don't have to be conscious of that when I'm talking to people from my own color and own place. But now across
You
the
know,
world, I have to be very conscious of talking about progressivism. Go ahead.
what's coming to my mind as you're talking about progress, for me, it's like, how about, because you obviously know that I'm doing a lot of research on Ubuntu, even Ubuntu as a philosophical foundation for educational leadership in Southern Africa. And you know, what I'm coming to understand is that my people were more interested in character development.
Okay. Okay.
And so when we speak about progressiveness and we look at the world now, you know, I recently, because of this work that I'm doing around Ubuntu and educational leadership, I found Morena Mohlomi, who was a Mosotho chief. And he actually mentored, he was a healer as well. And he mentored Moshoeshoe the first, right? To become the kind of leader that he is. Now, Morena Mohlomi traveled a lot. He was known for his ethical leadership, even as a leader. He was very critical of fake healers, you know, and he would often, you know, speak out about them, even in their presence. He was very compassionate. His leadership is characterized by a lot of compassion. And he focused on people development. And so he groomed Moshoeshoe the first, who's also part of my lineage, by the way. And so that is an interesting thing that this work has allowed me to do. But for me, the more I read up on these things, the more I realize that African-centered education was based on socialization and the building of a human being, not of a carpenter, not of a farmer, not of a this and a that, but of a human being and moral values or values, being a person of stature. In fact, stature might not be the right word. In Sesotho, we call it siriti. And it's probably something one can connect to your etheric body. So when you think about your energy body and it being alive and vibrant, siriti is the same thing. You don't need to have money to have siriti. It is a stature that people embody, and many people would spend the rest of their lives striving towards being that and seen as that in the community. And so when we speak about progress, for me, it's like, what does progress really mean? But then again, that is the dominant worldview and the indigenous worldview, and some of the things we deem as important, which form part of possibly the differences and the tensions that might exist in how we view the world
Yep, for
or our
sure.
experiences.
Presence is a word that has appeared probably somewhat to Sarite, presence or vitality, yeah, etc.
Yes.
But that's in the West, that's become quite common, and it's often connected with mindfulness training. So how we can do mindfulness practices, right? Spiritual practices from better presence, a more aware presence. So it's not character per se. It's interesting. We're and the reason is character when you education, which we have in the West, has more or less slid to the conservative right wing.
Mm-hmm.
They're interested in character education more. The left wing, so-called progressives, less and less interested in character education and have other ideals, and do not like to get too caught up in character. So it's just an interesting tension between, again, where we will cross in how we have conversations about the purpose of education, right? I mean, that's what we're talking
Mm.
about. And how do we frame education? And Four Arrows, who you are now working with Four Arrows, he's your supervisor, I understand, at Antioch University as you're starting your PhD in January. Very exciting because I've worked with Four Arrows quite a few years as well. So you're going to have an indigenous perspective, even though he's a very Westerner, also part white as well. It's going to be very interesting for you to have all these interactions and negotiating these territories. So I guess the question I have for you is, why would you ever want to have a conversation with me when I am so different from you?
Because I appreciate difference. I think, in fact, yesterday I was invited to have a conversation in African Family Talk about African-centered business in a Eurocentric world.
Okay.
And one of the things I said is that, or one of my observations generally is that it is unfortunate that Black people are the biggest population in South Africa, and yet the biggest consumers with the least resources. And with the intergenerational, transgenerational, ancestral trauma research work I'm doing, I have an appreciation of where that comes from. But my observation is that a lot of the time we let our differences get in the way of progress, whatever way one chooses to define progress, even for ourselves. So, not having the ability to set differences aside and to make space for growth within those differences, I find that a problematic sort of like way to approach life, because then it does not allow us to grow. It's like having a discussion, or the other view I have is that people who generally care about each other will have very deep differences, because you care about each other, and so how you do things, why you do things, has a relatively big enough influence on each other. So that's one of the beliefs I have, to say, in fact, there's a Sesotho saying around that. I've just forgotten it now. I'll find it and I'll send it to you. But people who live together are bound to have fights. It is in how you resolve things. And I think if people focused on their shared goal, perhaps the differences would not be that big. Maybe I'm naive, but that is my view.
Mm-hmm. And you have two children. I
I
imagine you
do.
have some differences with them.
I do, but I'm more and more learning to understand them as full human beings. And that requires a very different mindset, even from a parenting perspective. I've got two beautiful sons, and I have a very deep connection with them. In fact, a bit more is being revealed about our spiritual connection. So, in my role of mentoring, I find that I'm becoming more and more deliberate about how I can support them on their journeys.
Mm.
Yeah.
And they're one's a teenager and one's coming up to be a teenager.
Yeah. So Ty is turning 18 in December, and Rory
Okay.
just turned 9 in April.
Mm.
So quite a big age difference.
Yeah.
I try and nurture their relationship together, but also understanding that they're two different people. They are so tender. They're so tender. Sometimes it frightens me because the world is so harsh.
Okay.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I really hope they grow to develop some grit, that fearlessness.
Okay. Well, there's a good question. So, you talked about a Eurocentric worldview of trying to understand business practices in your country and how to, basically liberate yourselves as much as possible from that view alone, and that there are alternatives, and that you actually have historical grooves and trajectories to work upon for those alternatives if we were dare to look, and if we were dare to challenge the hegemony, right, the powers of the regular dominating views. Now, I'm going to ask you the question is, do you think my theory of fearlessness is Eurocentric?
I think I would like to believe that a lot of your work is for people, because I've come to understand you personally. I don't think you're racist. So I think you are a human being with a view, and not necessarily a white view in terms of your academic work. And I think that is why it's been about a year since we've known each other. Um, yeah, and I think that is why we have an appreciation for each other. I watched one of your interviews because I've been trying to understand your work a bit deeply. You've been at it for many years. And so because I'm integrating it in a project I'm working on, in trying to understand fear. And the video you shared yesterday or the day before, I think one of the things that you mentioned is that fear is about how we view things. One of the things you said in your 1999 book, if I'm correct, is it 1999 or 2000 and something, 2001, you said we must look at how we take in knowledge, and that will sort of like give us an indication of how we develop fear. And I'm paraphrasing. And so I think fear is an outlook. Um, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's one of the ways I methodologically parse or try to pull
Mm-hmm.
apart, deconstruct is another way,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
decolonize is another way. I could use all those languages, whether you like them or not, but if you don't like them, let me know. But it's like that's how I'm attempting to take the very structuring of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
And I think,
built on a worldview.
yeah, and I think that informs why people make decisions or how they make decisions, right?
Mhm.
And it's that um, choice between whether we become open to the possibilities, or our choices contract our world.
Mhm.
So there's that two, those two.
Mhm. Yeah,
I think.
that's what I call your pragmatist. You're very practical. You're very pragmatic. You want to know how is it going to come down to how people make choices and what is going to be the outcomes. And that's your activist. That's the activist part of you. So I've had to try to claim myself that I'm an activist too. I just tend not to so much be a pragmatist. Now that's one difference I think we have. And I have that with Four Arrows, I have it with other people. But it's also got to do, I think, a lot with people who have been oppressed, obviously, and for a long periods of time. I find the indigenous thinkers are almost all pragmatists. Philosophically, I would call it pragmatist. And there's a whole history upon, well, what is pragmatism philosophy? Well, it's not the same as existentialism. It's not the same as rationalism. It's called pragmatism for a reason. And it's often got to do with what is happening, and that is what's true. Like from what happens, the outcome will dictate more or less what's true. And so truth claims are made upon what actually happened. And so it's got that very empirical, very situated, very social, very material base. And you know, I think of it's also very motherly. It's like that's what mothers pay attention to is what's actually happening here. How is this household actually being run? And that managerial, that business people, very pragmatic as well. So that's a difference we have because I play with being a parent, I play with being an entrepreneur. But at another level, I'm always working at this edge to try and push knowledge, push how we understand knowledge and how we use philosophical biases, bases, value systems that actually shape the way knowledge is created. So the knowledge of how fear and fearlessness are created really interests me because I find most 99.9% of the language about fear is pragmatic.
So what is the point of knowledge if it's not going to change us?
Well, to me, it's not either or. So it's
but
not it will or it's not it won't.
But a lot of the time, people know things, but it has not meant anything to them.
True.
And is that not part of the problem we are facing right now? And again, when we look at Ubuntu, for example, as an educational practice, right?
Like a higher principle, isn't it? Higher principle, ethical principle.
Yeah. It's about embodiment. It's about being. So what it for me, and this is at a very everyday person, what does knowing all these things mean if you are not going to use them for the better of the all, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same argument you could make is that some people, you know everything about ethics and morals and they've studied it and they live relatively immoral lives. So where's the problem? You see, what I'm saying is I don't think it's the knowledge that's the problem. I think it's how you are taught and learn how to have a relationship with knowledge so that it is embodied knowledge, so that it's holistic knowledge, not, you see, just rational knowledge or knowledge of text or knowledge of a hero that you're following, but you actually cannot integrate it holistically embodied across body, mind, soul, spirit, across the sociological, economic, psychological, spiritual dimensions. So my approach has been from the beginning to study fear has been holistic. It's been holistic or what's called integral as well, which is a little more complicated than holistic. And so it's critical. So I have these lenses. I have a critical lens on the study of fear. I have a holistic integral lens on the study of fear. And then I've brought in an indigenous perspective on the study of fear later on. And I've also brought in a matrixial, which is a feminine-based theory and philosophy. And so once you start seeing that, oh, Michael is not just talking about fear like we talk about fear normally. It's not how it's defined in a dictionary or an encyclopedia, which those tell you nothing about the perspective of which the knowledge is coming from, right? They just tell you what the definition of fear is. And that's where we educate ourselves on that kind of teaching. And it's very pragmatic. It's because it always comes to how do you manage fear? That's pragmatic. Why do you want to know more about fear? Is because you want to manage it better.
Mm.
So I accept that's
Um,
probably a principle behind why we actually want to know anything about fears, because we want to manage it better. And the worst side
correct.
of that is we want to control it better, and that we can actually use it to control other people and other things by creating fear.
Well, I think knowing your personal fears might help you, and I know you differentiate between fears and fear. Um, but I think anything that doesn't allow you to have a full expression of life should be overcome, right? Or at least try,
Why?
so that one can have a fuller experience of life.
Why?
I think this is that's why we're here. I really think that is why we're here, and I think I believe in destiny, and I think when we do not do things we could have done, we affect other situations as well that could have been. I think we fail at who we could have become. I don't know if that's too romantic.
Well, you've learned that from somewhere. You've adopted it as a teaching, or do you think you've kind of put your own customized spin on it? Or is it a kind of a fairly traditional teaching, which is basically a life of virtue? If I live a life of virtue, that will help me and it will help the generations before or after, because I'm not sinning, is the other way. If you're not in virtue, then you're probably in vice, which is could be called a sin. It could be called, pathology as well, right? In clinical language, that would be called a pathology. So pathologies are not going to help you, like, and they're certainly not going to help anybody else. So it's like an illness, right? Or a dis-ease. And so I use their language, it's fear-based. So I actually agree with you is that if it's fear-based where you're operating from, you will create more fear-based results. And of course, that goes back to philosophies of karmic, destiny, all
Ah,
these kinds of things. So
mhm.
there's a lot of connection between those languages. What do you think of all that?
That's very interesting, and I'd like us to go into that because I mean, growing up, I
Yeah.
always used to say, I want to live all my dreams.
Oh,
I
okay.
want to live all my dreams. And I have many dreams, and there are many things I want to do in life, right? And I've been doing them, and I did not realize that I've been doing them until recently. And they're becoming bigger and bigger experiences, and I love that. But it's also scary to say, really? So I get those kind of moments as well. But I want to be all that I can be. I don't want to live a life of regrets. And I think for me, when I bring it a little bit down to earth, is um, there are so many things I would be making possible for those who come after me, you know? And for me, that is something beautiful, to show someone that it is possible, um, to have a big life. I want to have a big life. I don't want to be stuck in the same place. I don't want to do the same things. I think there's a lot to learn about life, and I think I want to learn as much as possible. And I want my life to mean something, and I think it can only mean something when it is about more than me, I guess, you
Yeah.
know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
You have that
so I
social
don't know.
ethic.
Yeah, I don't know if that has anything to do with fear. Um,
Well, let me try.
but
Let me jump in if I can. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Um, so I could agree, very similar. I want to be all I can be. This is called human potential. I want to not be small. I want to be big because I feel that's just who I am, and I have a lot to give. I have a lot of gifts, da da. Now, here's the critic in me. That is a very common discourse and belief system in the Western world, the Western white world.
Really?
Oh, yeah. That is very common. It's not everybody, but it's quite a large chunk of the population in the human potential movement, particularly after World War II. So again, I'm speaking from my situation in the Western, particularly Americas, but also Europe. And it took off. This belief system took off. I can be what my dreams, I can be what I want to be. Why shouldn't I be what I want to be? Why should I be small? I should be great and big. And so this human potential movement grew and it took over into the spiritual communities. And a lot of the kickback was the spiritual communities are saying, no, you should be humble. You should be satisfied with the smallness of your being if you're connected to the divine, because the divine is great. You don't need to be great. Be humble, be small, be connected to the divine because the divine is great. And you will have a good life. And then you won't have the problem of arrogance, of inflated ego, of wanting too much and to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you get into power distortion, the bigger you want to be. And you see the whole Western world, I just cringe when I watch how it wants to be big at everything. It wants to be super big. And I see white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy as
I
the
think for me,
ideology.
I think for me, the question is why, So for me, what guides me is I was actually thinking about it earlier, driving to this place, that I've always gravitated towards experiences that help me become a better version of myself, and how I am in the world. So for me, that is what like bigger means for me, how I have outgrown certain patterns or ways of thinking or dependencies, right? And that is what bigger means for me. So those kind of things that make me a better human being, that is my drive. And how me being a better human being can be useful to the world. I don't know why other people want to be bigger, but my question to them would be, why would you want to be bigger so that you can be destructive? That for me is an illness presenting itself, yeah.
Well, they would argue, this is my argument, the reason they would say that I want to be bigger so I can destroy others when I need to, because others are sometimes evil and others are powerful and big and they are destroying. So we want to be able to be more powerful than they, just in case we need to destroy them, because they're bad, they're evil, they're wrong. Their bigness, you see, is dirty, dark, bad. Our goodness, our bigness is good, virtuous, good. That is how we're sitting in the world, as far as I'm concerned, and it is a very dangerous politics.
Yeah. What you are saying is making me think of Vaclav Havel, that I've been reading his work, and how he might have been perceived to have failed in refusing to be political, and in what his definition of freedom is. I think for me, it is sick that we cannot conceive a free world where people get along despite their differences. I think that is horrible. Yeah, I think it's horrible that we have gotten to this point in history. And I was thinking about him the other night, and I was thinking, okay, would it mean that I would fail at whatever mission? Because for me, it's like, but give people a choice, and help people become the kind of people who would choose to do the right thing, the most regenerative thing, as opposed to the most destructive thing. And I don't know if that's even a possibility in this world that has been created. Oh, now I'm feeling so sad.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that not a
What
thing?
if people are distorted in their perception of reality and themselves? They can't make that best decision. And isn't that the job of educators, of psychiatrists, of ministers, of healers? It's to help people get back on the path of an accurate perception of reality, because they are making a lot of decisions based on illusions, delusions, pathologies, twisted ways of thinking that have been conditioned into them, often by authority powers who have hypnotized them. To use Four Arrows analogy, we're massively hypnotized under the powers of other regimes that are trying to tell us what the truth is and who to follow. And leadership, you can see, really important here, isn't it? What's going to be a leadership that can unwind those delusions, those, and of course then other people say, well, who are you to tell me that I'm deluded? You know? And then you got that problem now. Okay, so where's our reference for truth and reality anymore? And then you bring in the principle of Ubuntu. And you say,
I
well,
think
here's a principle that's universal. Will it help? Go ahead.
I think I'm feeling this loss because it feels like a loss, ne? Like now in this moment, this feels like a loss. It feels like something I've just worked through at a very deep level. Yesterday, I found out that one of the workers was doing something they're not supposed to be doing. And this is a person I trust, that I've been paying for coaching. I really saw their potential, and yeah. And so I understand the illness that people are suffering with, right? And I think I'm also having an appreciation that if a person has not decided who they want to be, no amount of intervention will help, right? And me, I am saying, in as much as I can hope that people make the right decisions, I am not their maker. So maybe that's a conversation they would then, who they become, where they are on their coming path. There's like all these things that I generally struggle with as I'm working with people, because I understand that people are dealing with the intergenerational trauma. I understand that people believe, or they have this sense of very deep lack mentality, and they believe they must steal from somebody else in order to be okay, instead of saying, hey, how did you do it? For me, that is how you make a different choice, to say, how did you do it? Can you please show me? If that is who they are, it doesn't matter what I tell them, what I show them. If they are not like that, they will make a different choice. And that has got nothing to do with me or any leader. And maybe that is their spiritual journey. Maybe they are on their second round here on earth and they're still a baby. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think I want to continue being the best version of me and sharing with people what has helped me to have this desire to be the best version of me, because it is an extremely peaceful place to be at, if people are interested. I think that is the conclusion I've come to. So no leadership, that it falls away, healer, it falls away. I'm just doing me. I'm just living my life. If people think there are any takeaways, sure, they
Mhm.
can.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it feels like a loss.
What's the loss again? Just clarify.
Thinking that I can help people.
Mhm.
Yeah. It feels like I literally have something here on a lump. Thinking that I can help people.
Well, isn't it because we grow up? I think there's a deep part. I certainly know it in myself as a young person, but also it is my own philosophy of human nature, is that we are actually born in a helping mode. We're born in a helping mode or paradigm because we are actually cared for to be born. We've actually been cared for. So we are being helped. And therefore, the helping knowingness of the value of helping is we were helped, and that's why we live. So I want to help. You see, the logic is almost unconsciously from the mother's womb,
Yeah, but to think
from the womb
that
of the
from
earth is a gift.
but to think that from your help, a person might pay it forward, might because I think that is what one hopes for, right? That ripple sort of like effect, the positive impact, right? And to not see it in the kind of choices a person makes or takes,
Mhm.
that for me has been disappointing, and that's where the help is. Because for me, if the help we are receiving is not helping us see that
Mhm.
we can make different choices which can affect the trajectory of, it's like people don't see how they don't see to, like yeah, or maybe they like shortcuts, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
um yeah, for me it's, I feel like I've lost that sense that people can see that by making a different choice, their outcomes will be different. And I used to attach that with my sort of like intervention. Now I'm saying to you, I'm losing that. I will just be me, whether,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
I think there's probably some other pathways than I will just be me. I think that's where you are at now. I think there are other pathways beyond that as well that include that. That's kind of just,
Mainly means
that's my
sharing what
experience.
I've come to understand. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be who I am, but I'm saying I do not want to attach a particular label to it, right? I'm going to continue doing my research, and it has the significance it has for me. I continue with my podcast because I love to share. So that is me being who I am and sharing the knowledge that I've come to understand and how it has affected my experiences. That is what I mean. And if it assists anybody, that is great. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's
So
fine.
that is what I meant when living for being who I am.
Yeah. Well, it's complex, and thanks for attempting to share as much as you can. And I thank myself for trying to understand as much as I can. It's very limited, is what I feel like. It's like, oh, I don't get it. I still would have to probe this with you and battle a little bit and sort and sift. But I also need to just sit with it, and I can watch this video over many times, which is even better. And that will just be a great way across the world that we can do this, and other people hopefully can benefit too. One question before we go is that you've taken on this research. If you want to describe it a little more, but I'll just describe it briefly. And then the question is, um, you're doing an intergenerational trauma as part of your decolonizing education leadership work and trajectory, this activist that you are. And in that decolonization, my question would something be, how is this of benefit to know that there is generational trauma and that it has epigenetic consequences? In other words, it's affecting the genetic and the outcome of behaviors in bodies, real bodies, generation to generation. How is that helping by doing that research or collecting it as you've done in some writing you've done? How does that help decolonizing work and liberation?
Mhm. Thank you for that question. And it ties into the conversation we've just had about being me. So, having embarked on this journey, um, did not only start with the curiosity of doing an academic study, like a formal research project, right? But it started with my calling to become a sangoma, meaning to be initiated as a medicine woman in the traditions of the Nguni people. And for me, that meant being called to heal the trauma of my people, meaning my people were crying for healing, for medicine. And so, as part of that, I answered the calling, obviously, and I agreed to do the work with them. And as part of that work that I am doing to heal my ancestors, I know that I'm also healing myself. And as part of that process, I now have certain abilities, being able to see, having access to information, which helps me deeply understand my process. So my intuition, my spiritual connection has grown stronger. Um, so that this journey has meant my decolonization. And because I did not have the language and I no longer have parents and my grandparents are also late, I don't have a point of reference. So for me, I am healing my lineage and I'm also developing a language for my story, for my life, and tracing the history of my people and how their experience with colonization affected who they were or their life experiences. I think getting to find out about epigenetics has been a bonus for me because I understood that by getting the calling, I'm being asked to heal my people, to correct things. My aunt, who was my gobela, a gobela means a teacher, she was my mother's younger sister. She trained me. And for me, that was another confirmation to say, this is a calling from my ancestors.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I was speaking, when I started developing the communication between my people and I, they told me that I asked them, where am I supposed to go? And they told me that I had to go to my aunt. So that again, for me, it makes sense as to why I'm being called to heal my lineage through my aunt and to learn the practices because my grandmother was also a sangoma. My mother's mother was a sangoma. My mother was supposed to be a sangoma. She did not complete her training and so on. So I've always understood the calling to be that a journey to correct things that had gone wrong in my lineage, and then having the abilities to heal and insight to the knowledge in terms of medicine and how traditional practices work is a bonus for me and my own embodiment of now this knowledge that I'm understanding. Now, the practical decolonization aspect for me is how did my people live? What was important to them? Who am I according to my people? And so that changes how I view my hair. That changes how I express myself. That, I then start to get into this questioning of, but how come I don't have a place I call home? Because land was taken away. Usually people used to say, I'm going home, meaning they're going to the village home.
Mhm.
We no longer have that. And that is a result of apartheid in South Africa. And so, how has that affected my life opportunities? Having gone to a public school that was under resourced, having lived through the kind of experiences that I lived through, understanding all of that. That for
Yeah.
me is what decolonization is. and to see how this version of education, the Western version, has continued to suppress and to create poverty, inequality, and illness in Africa, in South Africa, in the places, with the people I connect with, because yeah, I mean, we could go on and on and on, but that is what decolonization means. And more broadly, more in terms of how me coming to understand this becomes important in how I carry myself in my life, being valuable, is what am I going, now that I know, what am I going to do? And maybe that's where the activism comes in. What now?
Yeah.
Because I cannot continue to be driven by the same things that drive and enrich the people who captured my people and who took us through this whole ordeal.
Yeah. And
So
so
that
just,
is why decolonization is important to me. And I sometimes think it's very unfortunate that many people speak about decolonization. I don't think it is, the concept is, it's a very old concept, but there does not seem to be an interest to really decolonize. So the oppressors, the white supremacists, does not see how they have caused harm. And yeah.
so you want more scientific evidence of here's how you've caused harm, like, or at least we can show there's generational trauma and it actually affects genetics, which affects people's health and survival rates. And they're differential
Yes.
compared to
And
people
it's
who
it's
of a different
unfortunate
color.
that in this world that has been created,
Yeah.
we need to prove things
Yeah.
because the Western world dominates all other worlds.
Yeah.
And so hopefully, because they believe in science, they believe in research, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
it will, I don't know,
Yeah.
change something.
So it's a combination of traditional medicine, to put it bluntly, and modern medicine or contemporary medicine in a way. You are working at how to integrate those to be a more powerful set of, combinations for your work. All the best to you on that journey. I'm sure I'll be watching here and there, and we'll have our entanglements. Is there any question you want to leave me with and the audience about fear and fearlessness? Just off the top, because we do have to go.
I
Is there
think
anything as a question or a query?
where do you think I'm sitting in when it comes to my fear or fearlessness?
Your fear of fearlessness. Well, it's a good question for everybody. And it was very interesting. The Dalai Lama in 1995 was going around doing his sermons and talks. And at one point, I found a really lovely quote from one of his talks, and he was actually using it a few times. And he said, he was telling people, don't fear fearlessness. And I really like that quote because that means a lot. There's a lot behind that.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't explain it. And he typically doesn't write that kind of material. He's not that kind of scholar per se and or writer. But I think that is something that for me, if there's resistances to fearlessness, if there's resistances for people to reach this potential, this great essence, this presence, this spirit, etc., that is part of the spirit of fearlessness, you can bet that yeah, if we fear fearlessness, and I would ask you as a mother and all mothers, for example, or all parents, this is the question I'd leave you with today: is do you really want your children to be fearless?
It's painful.
Thank you. It probably is. It probably is. I have two children too, and I won't go into that now, but that's a whole other conversation. Thank you so much, Mmabatho, for today.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. And of course, the great follow up is, but I'm not afraid of pain.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
All
Bye
right.
bye.